Call this meeting back to order. I've just been informed that the flag is being displayed on the screen. It's been moved to get us ready for graduation. So on the screen is the flag. If you are willing and able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with some introductions. I'm Diane McBride, Board President. To my left,
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
George DeMarteau, Attorney for the District.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, Board Member.
James O'Brien, Board Member.
Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
Ariana McKnight, Student Council Board Representative.
Hi, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Neil Selm, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Doug Rivers, Board Member.
Good evening, May Abdullah, Board Member.
Good evening, Jennifer Laird, Board Member.
Hi, everyone. Karen Flanagan, School District Clerk. Hello, Anne-Marie Straczynski, Board Vice President.
thank you, everyone. Next up is agenda review, and we do have an item to add under new business, and this will be the approval of a due process resolution. So that'll be item 16B. Are there any other changes or notes? Any announcements? This brings us to board recognition. This evening, this is the last meeting for two of our board members. I'm going to try to keep it brief because it's with mixed feelings for both of them, so I'm going to try not to stare too much at them. First up is Nikki LaPlaca. We have some resolutions. We have a plaque here from Monroe County School Board Association, and also a gift from us as a token of our appreciation for your service to the district and the children of this district. It's been a great 3 years with you, and you've brought a lot to the table, and we really appreciate the viewpoints and the questions and learning to work together and become a great team. So my first resolution, whereas Nicole M. LaPlaca has demonstrated exceptional commitment to the district and to the continuous improvement of education, and whereas Nicole LaPlaca has served as a representative to various committees, including the Budget Advisory Council, 3 years, Finance and Audit Committee, 3 years, Instructional Space Committee, 3 years, Elmer Gordon Scholarship Selection Committee, 2 years, Rush-Henrietta Scholarship Fund, 3 years, Upstate Institute for School Board and Staff Development, 2 years. And whereas Nicole M. LaPlaca has served as a board liaison to File Elementary School and the Transportation Operations Center. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District hereby pays tribute to Nicole M. LaPlaca in recognition for her years of service to the Rush-Henrietta community as a board member of education from 2018 to 2021. I'll take a motion to approve that. I have Mrs. Straczynski, Mrs. Abdullah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. I whispered to her, we'll hug later. It's kind of congested up here. Next is for James C. O'Brien. Whereas James C. O'Brien has demonstrated exceptional commitment to the district and to the continuous improvement of education, and whereas James O'Brien has served as representative to various committees, including the Rush-Henrietta Education Foundation, 3 years, Sports Booster Club, 2 years, Policy Committee, 3 years, Elmer Gordon Scholarship Selection Committee, 2 years, Rush-Henrietta Scholarship Fund, 3 years, Monroe County School Board Association Labor Relations Committee, 3 years, and whereas James O'Brien has served as board liaison to Leary and Valmer Elementary Schools, now therefore be resolved that the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District hereby pays tribute to Mr. O'Brien in recognition for his years of service to the Rush-Henrietta community as a member of the Board of Education from 2018 to 2021. I'll take a motion to approve that. Mrs. Laird, a second. Mrs. Straczynski, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is our board member report from our student representative, Ariana.
Thank you. During the past few weeks, Student Council ran their election for next year's officers. Our new president is Allison Utter. Our vice president is Tracy Sun. And for secretary, Katie Ventresca was selected, as well as Lily Ventresca, who will serve as treasurer for next year. Candidates underwent an election process for each position, and everyone ran a thoughtful, positive race. In addition, I will be continuing to represent Student Council next school year, as I will serve as a cabinet member and senior Student Council board representative, and I'm so excited that I will be joined by the new junior Student Council representative, Evangelina Mack. Next year, one thing Student Council will continue to work on is providing mental health support to our students. Several officers spoke of improving school spirit with more school activities that are fun and engaging. Student Council will also do its part to implement efforts approved by the board towards equity and inclusion, and we will be one of several leadership groups helping to organize and run the Rock to Change Summit next spring. This was a difficult year for students and staff, as well as families, but we persevered and completed this school year. Many are looking forward to summer and the next school year. And finally, I would personally like to thank the entire Board of Education for the formal resolution I received from you recognizing my achievement as a student representative and student within this district. It was wonderful to receive and very unexpected, and I want to thank each one of you for your thoughtfulness. I am looking forward to attending board meetings next year to see what new steps we will take to improve the district. And I hope you all have a wonderful summer. Thank you.
Thank you. And I might say, Ariana, it really is important to us as a board to have a student representative, to have your voice heard, and to participate in our conversation. So we're really glad that you'll be back with us next year.
Thank you.
Next up is the public forum. This is for members to address items of interest that are not on the agenda. I'll ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. We'll have you come up to the microphone here in the middle. There's a couple of them I see. And then you can have your comments made. We may not answer you because this is not a give and take portion, but we take in your comments into consideration. First up, I have the first card I received is from Rachel Sherman. Please come up to the front, Rachel.
Good evening. Rachel Sherman, 15 Glen Acre. So, as a mother of a rising 5th grader, 7th grader, and 9th grader, I speak for a lot of parents, I think, when I say that we are really hoping, some counting on, having 5-day-a-week in-person school this fall. And since it's not on the agenda, I wanted to raise the question of how 5 days a week in-person school planning has been going. I've heard the superintendent, Mr. Wright, and the board here in public meeting say that you hope and plan to return all kids to in-person 5-day-a-week school in the fall. Thank you so much for stating that strong intention, which I share, and I look forward to joining you being seated on the board in July to help work towards that. So I'm hoping that someone can, I haven't heard a plan yet of how the district will be ready for that, or with an alternate plan if circumstances change. I'm hoping that someone can give an update. While school is just ending, there are only 11 weeks until school starts in the fall, and that is going to go by in the blink of an eye. And I'm hoping that I can hear the board as well share their views about this planning. So I'd like to just propose 2 things for consideration. First, that the board consider meeting weekly through the summer so that we can stay on top of the planning and any unexpected changes to state or local guidance. The board has a big role in this with the policy hat, the budget hat, the support and accountability hats. I'm ready, willing, and able to write letters, to advocate with our state and county officials, and do all that I can in a board role to help pave the way for kids to get back to the classroom full time. You might ask, well, why meet weekly? I know the board only currently has 2 summer meetings planned, one in July and one in August. But as we learned last summer and recently, state and local guidance can change quite quickly. We may need to have to pivot and communicate quickly as a district. We may need to have to allocate more money for various facets of reopening. And we may need to be on full court press with our elected officials. Meeting weekly would enable us to act quickly as needed for our students. And second, I ask that you develop and publicize both a Plan A and a Plan B. I'm sure our district will work up the best possible plan under current guidance and current external factors like infection rates, things we don't have control over. But if something changes to put Plan A into jeopardy, I hope we will have communicated as well as we can what the second best option might look like. Scenario planning like this can help families scenario plan as well for the fall and reduce anxiety. So I hope the superintendent can update the board and the public on fall planning tonight during his superintendent's report. And I hope that at the July board meeting, when I understand the board calendar will be decided upon, that there's support for weekly meetings until all kids are back to school 5 days a week in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you. The next card I have is David Stevenson.
Hello, Dave Stevenson, 69 Gatehouse Trail. I'd like to read an article from Trial Site News. Its title is called Bioethics of Experimental COVID Vaccine Deployment under Emergency Use Authorization. The article is written by Dr. Robert Malone, who is the original inventor of the mRNA and DNA vaccine core platform technologies, but he also has extensive training in bioethics. He says, I was on call with a Canadian primary care physician last week for a couple of hours. He related the story of 6, in his mind, highly unusual clinical cases of post-vaccination adverse events that he had personally observed in his practice involving vaccination of his patients with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine product. What was most alarming to me was that my clinical primary practice physician colleague told me that each of these cases were reported as per the proper channels in Canada, and each was summarily determined to not be vaccine-related by the authorities without significant investigation. Furthermore, he reported to me that any practicing physician in Canada who goes public with concerns about vaccine safety is subjected to a storm of derision from academic physicians and potential termination of employment and loss of license to practice. Why is it necessary to suppress discussion and full disclosure of information concerning mRNA, reactogenicity, and safety risk? I believe the adult citizens must be allowed free will, the freedom to choose, and this also applies to children as well. This is particularly true in the case of clinical research. These mRNA and recombinant vaccine products remain experimental at this time. The suppression of information, discussion, and outright censorship concerning these current COVID vaccines, which are based on gene therapy technologies, cast a bad light on the entire vaccine enterprise. It is my opinion that the public can handle information in open discussion. Furthermore, we must disclose any and all risk associated with these experimental research products. The adult public deserve the full disclosure of risk that one would normally require in an informed consent document for a clinical trial. And note, parents, must supply informed consent for their children who to receive it. The key point here is that what is being done by suppressing open disclosure and debate concerning the profile of adverse events associated with these vaccines violates fundamental bioethical principles of clinical research. This goes back to the Geneva Convention and the Helsinki Declaration. There must be informed consent for experimentation on human subjects. There is widespread agreement that the consent process can be analyzed as containing three elements: information, comprehension, and voluntariness. To wrap up, an unlicensed medical product deployed under emergency use authorization remains an experimental product under clinical research development. The Geneva Convention, the Helsinki Declaration, and the entire structure which supports ethical human subject research requires the research subjects to be fully informed of risk and must consent to participation without coercion. What I would like to say is that it would be wrong for school boards and the superintendent to require mandatory vaccination of children to attend public school. I believe that if the FDA approves such vaccines, that it would be a rushed and hasty approval process, which normally takes 2 years and is not scheduled to conclude until the year 2023. Therefore, schools must not mandate vaccines, the COVID vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you. Next card I have is Blake Smith.
Thank you very much. Blake Smith, I live on Rush-Scottsville Road since 1986, 35 years, and been a taxpayer of Rush-Henrietta schools. I'd like to echo something Rachel said, something that was mentioned at other school board meetings that seemed like a good idea because of all the I guess, back and forth commentary of all the school districts in Monroe County, especially, and some of the ones, well, all over the United States, actually, is that we try to adopt some kind of question and answer period meetings during the summer where we can discuss policies, courses, curriculum with the parents and the school board, if that could possibly be done or set up, even 1 or 2 meetings sometime before September, 1 in July, 1 in August, something like that, or more if possible. And also, I was disappointed, I didn't mention it last time when we had the candidates speaking out before the elections, is that I really didn't hear anyone saying specifically that their primary goal was the schools to be open fully by September. I know that was in their heart, but it just was kind of disappointing. There was many other topics that seemed to be on the forefront. And I firmly believe that the children are most important, and the children's contact with other kids is just as important, and they should be in school full time. About 2.5 weeks ago, we all have heard about the governor and Dr. Zucker, the Department of Health, and the mask mandates being changed. And then they were changed again, and then there were letters sent. There was an article from the Pioneer School, which is in Cattaraugus County, that maybe you've heard about that, but the superintendent decided to make masks optional indoors and out there. And then he was contacted by various people, and I heard the governor contacted them, but I'm not exactly sure about that. But they had to reverse the plan to do that because they were threatened with fines and withholding funding for the school. And the governor wanted the masks to remain the rest of the school year, which was only 2 weeks, so he relented for the benefit of the schools rather than making it a big incident or argument. Even though for the children, he thought it was best. I read an article from an unknown state official, which I'll mention, but I would like to have a name, but I don't have it. But it says the governor has said as soon as the vaccines, which is the COVID vaccine, is approved by the FDA, and they're thinking August of this year, that all New York children must be vaccinated in order to attend public and private schools, ages 12 and up. And also that ages 5 and up must be vaccinated in order to attend school, and they're looking at January for that. Now that seems kind of fishy to me, but knowing what the governor thinks and says, which many of us do, and he seems to have total control over the situation with the schools, with the masking. Our legislature chose to do different things to try to take away his power, but they really did not. He still has emergency powers. And I also have heard that the emergency for the state of New York will not be rescinded until the national one is rescinded. And as you all know, that other states have chosen to do different things, even with the national emergency going on their own. And I'm very upset about our officials with the county legislature, the county executive, and our health commissioner for not even disagreeing at all or questioning the policies of our state and our governor for the masking, the different types of schooling, the distancing, that, in my humble opinion and others, is really not based in science, especially since we have a rapidly declining case rate, as you all know. Ever since the last time I was here and we were here, it's been dropping like crazy. And I'm very uncomfortable with the situation that is looking forward to us, and I hope that the school district is fully open by September, and I'll be very unhappy about making another school tax payment if it is not. For the children, I think it's just ridiculous that they're kept in half days and masked. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This brings us to the public hearing. I'm sorry, before I go on, was there anyone else that wanted to speak during public forum? All right, seeing none, thank you. We will move to the public hearing about the stimulus funds and foundation aid. I turn it over to the superintendent.
Sure. Andy and I are going to be tag teaming this. I think he's going to okay. So I'll wait for your cue then. So while we're getting set up, tonight we'll be holding a public hearing to discuss how the district plans to utilize the additional foundation aid that we received from the state, along with the federal stimulus money that came earlier this year. These plans are preliminary, and we're seeking feedback from both the board and the community at large. I've had the opportunity now to meet with groups of students here at the high school and at Roth Junior High School, just to talk with them about how the year has gone and what we need to consider as we hopefully transition into a more typical schooling situation in the upcoming year. And we also held a thought exchange, which is an online tool that we often use to solicit open-ended feedback from community members, where we had more than 270 thoughts that were rated more than 8,000 times. Some of the key ideas that were highly rated centered around what's been talked about tonight: fully reopening schools, maintaining smaller class sizes. I think it's worth noting that K-6, Rush-Henrietta, has the smallest class sizes in the county. And then also other issues that centered around academic support and supporting students with mental wellness. How we doing down there?
We're having technical difficulties.
Oh, that's always the case.
The screen, but why don't you keep going?
The blessing and the curse of technology. So,
Yeah.
so the funding that we received came in 3 different pots. One, as I mentioned earlier, was foundation aid. That is funding that comes from the state of New York. And then there were 2 pots of federal stimulus funding. One that is called Carissa funding, that is coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriation funding. And that came in December of 2020, earlier in the school year. And then additional funding came in the form of American Rescue Plan funding, which came in March. So the additional foundation aid represents about $2.9 million worth of new funding. And the good news with this allocation is that it's expected to be consistent year to year. We also received an additional $4.9 million, a little bit above that, which is a one-time allocation. That represents, I mentioned, the Carissa funding that came earlier this year in December. That is a one-time allocation, and that will need to be spent by September of 2023. And the funds that came through the American Rescue Plan represents a shade under $7.4 million. That will need to be spent prior to September of 2024. Allowable expenditures for each of these categories is as follows. When we're talking about foundation aid, that money needs to be spent on student performance and need. Carissa funds are to be used to avoid layoffs and to support remote learning. ARP, or American Rescue Plan funds, are to support a safe return to school, technology and social emotional learning, with priorities centered around, again, returning to school, learning recovery, or we call it learning forward, and meeting the needs of students. So I was very pleased when I had the opportunity to speak with students, and when I saw what came out of the thought exchange, and then also as we were looking at what's allowable, because I think it aligns very nicely with our plan in terms of, we went several steps further in terms of avoiding layoffs. We've reinstated positions. We've added teacher capacity, especially at the elementary level, in support of maintaining smaller class sizes. Allocations will go toward academic support. As you know, we, even though that's, as we talk about reopening schools, one of the question marks we have centers around what's going to be required in the way of remote learning. We have made investments in infrastructure and administrative oversight and technology support. And so even though these plans are preliminary, in terms of the feedback we've received, in terms of what's allowable, we feel like there's a nice alignment. So I'm going to have, Andy, are we a go as far as technology down there?
Yep.
We're in business?
You're live.
Then I will turn it over to you to walk us through some of the details.
Okay, as the superintendent mentioned, this is very preliminary. We didn't start getting numbers until late May, and we still don't have detailed state guidance. So as you can imagine, it's difficult to come up with a thorough, comprehensive plan how to spend this sort of money in a short time. And the bigger thing is we won't know until we get the detailed state guidelines what they'll accept and won't accept. So Dr. McHugh has had a number of meetings with our BOCES grants expert who's coordinating this. So as time goes on, these plans will be refined, but we think we've aligned with what the thought exchange said and what the general tone of the federal guidelines were. And of course, it's never simple, so we just went through the broad guidelines of what we received, but those are broken down. For example, the Carissa is broken down into 3 pots. So 90% of it, the federal government said the state lead educational agency, which is us as the school district, has control over. But then there's 2 other buckets, one that the state SED has control over, about 1.6 million, and then the governor has discretionary funds, and for us, our share is 308 million. So as the state issues their detailed guidelines, we'll have to comply with each one of those buckets. Same thing with the American Rescue Plan, 6.7 million is allocated for the district to comply with, but then the state came out with some detailed uses for some of the other money. For example, 1% is being allocated, or $100,000 for after-school learning recovery. Another $100,000 will be for summer enrichment programs. And then 5%, or about $500,000, has to be allocated specifically for learning loss. So these align pretty nicely with the broad concepts that we've come up with for the spending, and we'll flesh out the details and ensure they're in compliance with what the state guidelines are. And because it is so early in the process, we expect there'll probably be changes to this plan, and that'll go through the state for review and approval as time goes on. And then the last piece, the foundation aid, as the superintendent mentioned, this is the only piece that we hope is recurring. The federal stimulus money is one time, so we're hoping to invest it and spend it on one-time type activities and not use it for our cost structure that we expect to continue after the expiration of these. So the Carissa, as he mentioned, expires September of 2003, the ARP in September of 2024. So we need to make sure that the spending plans we develop for those come to a natural conclusion by then. However, the foundation aid increase is, we're hoping that's a permanent increase to our state aid funding, so we're investing that in positions that we hope will be able to continue even after the pandemic's over and the stimulus funding is done with. So foundation aid, some of the uses we're having, $500,000 we're adding 5 new teaching positions, and so these will be supplemental positions where the instructional folks think they're needed. 2 reading teachers, 1 speech teacher, 1 ENL teacher, and 1 business teacher. So these are in addition to what was in our original budget, but we believe they would be very beneficial to providing additional student support or opportunity. $140,000 for expanded ESY, Extended School Year Special Ed program. Last year we took that program back from BOCES, and we hope to grow and build upon that. And that expansion we hope will last for 2 to 3 years as we keep the stimulus money. The base program will go on indefinitely, but we're we've offered it, expanded the offering to the number of kids who can participate. $120,000 for additional clerical support for all of our instructional directors as they analyze the data to see where the student learning loss is or their social emotional needs. There's a lot of data to analyze. We've reduced clerical positions over the years, so we think it would be very beneficial to add them back to help in the data collection so the directors can analyze and identify areas of need. And then the biggest thing, $2 million to avoid teacher layoffs and ensure small class size or the class size targets that the board has set, which are some of the lowest in the county. That came through in the thought exchange as being a priority. And so definitely funding to preserve the small class size. And then the last piece is $65,000 for a contract with U of R to provide social emotional support, mental health support to our elementary students. We already have a process in place for secondary students, so this will enable it to expand elementary. And because it's foundation aid, we hope to continue this program for a number of years. Carissa funds, Remote Learning Academy, and this is one the state for the past year has indicated we should continue to plan long-term for remote learning, so we've been gearing up for that. But it seems like the state's pivoting a little bit. They don't want remote learning that many districts did, which was basically a camera in the classroom, so some kids are at home watching the teacher teach live. That was never our model to begin with. We're not sure where the state's going to land with the remote learning. We suspect it'll be acceptable and they'll require us to deliver it as long as it's not conjoined with a camera in the classroom, which we have not done and would not do. So we've set aside money for that, but this will be dependent upon final state guidance on what we can or can't provide or must provide. A little bit of money to continue the enhanced disinfecting. We presume we'll have to continue that another school through another school year. So to keep the higher level of purchasing the disinfecting material and equipment. And then another $1.1 million to avoid the staff layoffs. And basically, this would preserve our capital funding. As you know, our budget takes our building aid we get from past capital projects and reinvest it. That reinvestment would be reduced if we didn't have this fund. So that basically enables us to maintain that as well as provide the small classrooms or at least the classrooms to the board sizes. And then we're expanding the ENL summer program this year. We're offering transportation to our students as well. So we're adding some money for that, and we would hope to continue that for a few years. And with the ARP funds, academic interventions is certainly an investment, and these are annual investments that we show up here. They're not the sum total. We would hope to continue these for the life of the grants. So academic intervention services, innovative safe learning spaces, which is really bringing technology into the classroom and modernizing our classrooms. We're starting a pilot this year, engaging teachers who want to pilot. What does a classroom of the future look like? And this funding, $300,000 a year for the next 4 years, would enable us to roll it out to many more classrooms. Again, some money to avoid staff layoffs, preserve all the programs and services we currently have, some money for high-impact tutoring, after-school tutoring for our more needy students, money for a summer learning program, as well as summer work days for our school counselors to develop a plan for when the kids return to school for their social emotional needs, as well as our natural helpers. Natural helpers are our high school students who volunteer to work with incoming freshmen. We would provide more funding to them to enable them to expand their services as all the kids return, and we want to be there to support them. And finally, instructional coaches, they're key in analyzing and developing, understanding what the academic needs are, the learning recovery that we need, so preserve those positions. So those are the general annual expenditures. We will refine these as time goes on, but this is the thinking we currently have. So any questions from the board?
Yeah, I have some.
Yeah.
Okay. First question is with U of R, the contract for elementary, the emotional support, is that in regards to the Healing Connection?
So the Healing Connection is working currently with grades 7 to 12. Okay. And if you remember, we had approached them about working with K-6, and they didn't do elementary. So the University of Rochester, URMC, they do take care of elementary students, and we are going to have 2 satellite clinics, one at Crane and one at Sherman. They usually do not do 2. But we really begged, and we said, you know, the fact that our district is very large, we needed them to set up some satellite clinic in those 2 schools. Even though they will be at these 2 schools providing that clinical-based counseling, it is open also to the other K-6 elementary schools. And in addition, if a student needs something beyond what can be provided in the schools, within the school setting, they will also have opportunities and access to the URMC locations where they can go for additional support.
Okay. And what about like co-pays and stuff? Will we work with parents if they can't do the co-pays and that kind of expense?
Those are still pieces that we have to work out, similar to when we did the Healing Connection in terms of the referral process, who to contact, et cetera. But yes, we will be able to work on some of these issues. Eventually, I'm sure we'll find a way. I always say, where there's a will, you know my MO, where there's a will, there's a way. And we always try to support as much as possible parents who are unable to.
And Crane and Sherman were picked just because, do you think the need for that?
Crane was the K-3, and we looked at Title I schools as well. Okay. And so it made sense to start with a K-3, and then the K-3 that feeds the 4-6 to go along with that as well. So we wanted to at least do a primary and also a 4-6 level to start with, especially when their whole goal was to just give us one.
That's exciting.
Yes.
That's good.
And that was a charge that you gave us, and we took that charge very seriously, and we've been looking for about 1.5 years. And Diane really is the person who's behind it, who's been working since she got here with being clear that we needed that at the K-6 level.
It's so hard to find for parents any kind of support for children, especially emotionally right now. Next question. That increase the positions for teaching, the reading positions, are those going to the elementary schools to help with learning recovery?
Do you know?
There are 2 positions that we're adding, and it is targeted toward learning recovery. One is going to go to split between Crane and File, and the other is going to be split between Sherman and Balmer.
Okay, and those are like, you're looking specifically for like a reading teacher?
Yes, those are reading specialists. That's going to be in addition and over and above what they are currently staffed with, including the additional ones that we have for Title I. We felt that based on the analysis that Dina Wilson had done with the principals, just based on the data and what they're seeing from the students this spring, that those buildings had the most need.
And you're also going to supply them with like some sort of reading recovery program?
They're going to work with Jeanette Canioto to implement our program.
Okay. I think that was it.
All right.
Nikki?
I have a question. With the teaching positions we were just talking about, I see that it's under foundation aid. Is that something that we're looking to continue after, like for many years going forward, and it's not going to be the first on the chopping block when foundation aid goes down, that type of thing?
Well, if foundation aid would go down, they may be, but that's a good thing with foundation aid. The expectation is it'll continue on because the hope is to keep these positions ongoing, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, board members?
I have another one. Oh, go ahead, May.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to follow up on the expanded summer school program for the special ed population. You said you're going to expand that, meaning you're adding more students, or we are evaluating the program itself and expanding what we offer these kids? Because not only they're special ed, but they went through the whole same learning loss that happened to everyone else.
Right, because of the learning loss this past year, we anticipated the need for a lot more students than we typically have, so this provides the funding to accommodate the increased number of students.
We've always had extended school year services. The services were being provided by BOCES. So when COVID hit last year, we decided that, you know what, it was better for us to take over that summer program. So we petitioned the state, and they gave us the okay to start running our own ESY program. And last year, we had to provide it all virtually because of the situation that we were in. Usually, there would be about 100 students who are eligible for ESY services, but when you're in a typical year, around 75 to 80 students usually attend, because there are times where parents just feel like students need time to breathe for the summer and really just do other activities than do school, even though the regression is real. And so this year, we anticipated, because, again, we were in the midst of COVID and students were attending either on hybrid or RLA, there's about 130 students who are eligible when we looked at our whole caseload that were eligible for ESY. And we anticipated that about most of them would come to summer school if they were offered. So right now, we have on the books from 130 who are eligible, 106 who have said yes, that they will come. And we planned for a 5-day program every single day at Vollmer Elementary School for half of the day. But as you are aware, we are struggling with staffing, and we're not the only district that's currently struggling with staffing. BOCES is struggling, and throughout the county, and I think throughout the state as well, because overall we need paraprofessionals. To have 106 students in the building, you need enough staff members to make sure that they are kept safe. And in addition, you need enough teaching staff and related services staff. And that's what we're struggling with, and every district is struggling with it. So even though there's 106, we are still going to offer an ESY program that is as robust as we can make it. But what we're going to do is kind of like we had to pivot as well. At the K-6 level, we're still going to have an opportunity for students to come on a hybrid model, similar to how we did during the school year. So at K-6, 3 days online, 2 days in person, because we had to divide the students because there's not enough paraprofessionals to be able to have all of them all at once. At the 7-12 level, we felt that it was appropriate to just have it online overall. And then also the transition program for 18 to 21, because there's only one teacher, we will have that 5 days a week. That's the plan right now. A letter went out to the parents last week explaining where we were at, what our plan was initially, and why we have to pivot. And then today, every parent should have received an email with specifics as to when their children, especially at the K-6 level, will be able to come in on which day. So that's where we are. And there are children who are also eligible for related services, and they will get some of that. We're still trying to get more staff so that we can make it, again, as robust as possible. But as you know, the program starts July 6th, so we're really in a crunch. And transportation will be provided.
In the Carissa funds, we have 1.1 million for avoid staff layoffs each year. And then in the ARP, we have 1.35, so just under $2.5 million. What's going to happen when we hit that 2025, when all of these funds are exhausted, and we have $2.5 million that we were using each year for staff? Is that, I know it's very preliminary, but that concerns me when we're looking at $2.5 million a year.
Yeah.
And then that fifth year comes, what do we do?
We can certainly prolong for a number, 3 or 4 years after that by utilizing our reserves, as well as, I hate to say it, but we could always reduce our transfer to our capital projects if we use some of that incoming building aid to if it was prioritized to preserve program, there's that option as well. But the big thing is right now, we don't have to dip into our reserves because of this extra funding. So it's going to preserve our reserves, which will give us 2 to 4 years beyond the expiration of this. So with all this money, it is giving us a long runway, thank goodness. And who knows what will happen with the tax cap after that. Will it go away if we get a different governor? We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Great, thank you.
Other board members? All right.
All right, so just to summarize, before we open it up to the public, we hope to support a lot of student needs with this funding, learning loss recovery, the technology enhancements, innovative learning spaces with technology, as well as safety being kept in mind. We'll be enhancing our after-school academic support, as well as increasing our summer program opportunities, preserving and increasing our teaching positions to enable the appropriate academic and SEL support, as well as investing in some administrative support to determine what our learning needs are, as well as our SEL needs. And we'll be able to continue our remote learning opportunities if there's a need for them. So with that, we'll open it up to the public for comments.
So what I would ask, if there is anyone in the audience who wants to make a comment, please raise your hand. I will call on you one at a time so we don't have a mass rush to the microphone. Mrs. Sherman.
Hello. Thank you for this work and the 5 additional positions. I just feel ecstatic about that. So happy to see resources added to reading and ENL and speech. Business sounds great to me. As far as summer school goes, I would love to see some remedial physical education opportunities in person for our kids. So many kids, and I'll speak especially for my 3 kids who are in the remote learning academy. They got some instructions every week to do about 20 minutes or so of exercises. That is a far cry from being in with other kids and running around and learning sports. I would love to see some swimming instruction. I just think that's a life skill that's so important to kids. So some remedial summer programming for physical education I think would be phenomenal. And the same is true for music. Band lessons, chorus opportunities just weren't what they were pre-pandemic. My own kids are behind in their musical abilities, and I would love to see opportunities for music instruction, remedial music instruction, more lessons and the like for kids who've lost a lot this past 15, 16 months or more. And then I do have a question about the foundation aid. There's $2 million to avoid teacher layoffs to ensure class size targets met and student learning supported. So can you please remind me of what the class size targets are at the different levels of schools, whether those will be met this fall, and also let me stop there, and I have one more question. So class size targets?
The class size target, the average class size for K3, the target is 16 with a max of 18. At 4-6, it's 21, or excuse me, it's 21 with a max of 23. And at 7-9, the target is 24, and at the high school, it's 25.
Do we have the resources to meet those targets this fall?
Absolutely. Our staffing plan is complete, and we meet all targets.
That's great news. And can you please explain to me, I was a part of the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Council this year, and so I'm familiar with the program and services budget, very extensive, dozens of pages budget, which includes all the head count, all the positions. And so a budget was passed this year with resources to provide the program and services as outlined in that program and services budget. Can you please explain to me then, if we have a budget that meets, that provides the resources to meet the heads that are set forth in the budget, why do we need to avoid staff layoffs, avoid teacher layoffs? I mean, $2 million, if you take $100,000 per head, let's say, that's 20 people. Would we have laid off 20 people?
The foundation aid was incorporated into that budget that was approved by the voters.
The increased foundation
yes.
aid of the
Yes.
$4+ million?
2.9 million.
2.9 million.
Yes, that was incorporated. When we heard, we had to revise the budget late in the process, but that was incorporated into it.
So you added heads in May?
We were able to support, yes, increased heads as well as reduce use of reserves.
So there, I'm just trying to understand, there would have been layoffs if not for...
We were not proposing layoffs. We would have had to use reserves, but this avoided the use of reserves.
I see. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, this makes sense. Okay, so instead of allocating reserves to fund those positions, those reserves go back, they're not...
This brought us closer to a balanced budget rather than a deficit spending budget.
Okay. And the reserves, they would have been appropriated fund balance, is that right?
Appropriated fund balance is one thing, plus use of reserves is another. So we totally did away with the use of reserves, and we were able to reduce the appropriated fund balance.
And the appropriated fund balance is basically the surplus from this year?
Correct. If there's money left over in this year, which we fully anticipate that it was used to balance next year's budget, so we didn't have to raise taxes. We were able to commit to the community during these tough times a flat tax rate as well.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? And what do you need from the board at this time?
At this point in time, we are just looking to see that you are at least conceptually supportive of what we are proposing. As we mentioned, these plans are preliminary, but we wanted to present our thinking around how this money should be spent.
Conceptually, everyone okay with conceptually?
Yes.
No. Okay,
Okay, very good. Thank you.
thank you. Next up is the public hearing on the Safe Schools Against Violence in Education, the SAVE Act. Our information was presented at our last meeting. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, it was presented to you, and also to make sure everybody was aware that we did post the information on the district website so that the public knew how to access it, so they had the opportunity to also give feedback at that time. And I also want to say that you can rest assured that our community relations folks will thoroughly review even the language, and where commas are missing, we will add commas, where EDs need to be added, all of that stuff. So just want to reassure you that. So it's really the tenet or the main themes of some of the inclusive language we wanted to make sure that you had enough time to think through.
So this is the public hearing portion, so is there any comments from the audience? All right, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And we will go to the action portion. And First up would be an action pertaining to the approval of the Code of Conduct. I will take a motion for the approval. Mrs. Straczynski, Mrs. Laird. Any discussion regarding that? We all saw the changes, the inclusive language. We're happy to hear that students were involved in this process. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is the action pertaining to the approval of the district safety plan that we had the privilege of seeing, and I know it went to the safety committee. Any questions? All right, I'll take a motion to accept. Mrs. Laird, Mrs. LaPlaca. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to the approval of the attendance policy. I'll take a motion to accept. Mrs. LaPlaca. Second, Mrs. Abdullah. Any discussion?
I just have a question.
Sure.
With the attendance policy, remote students, are they logged in as remote synchronous or remote asynchronous if they go offline? How is their attendance any different than a regular student in class?
No, it's either present or absent.
Okay.
Yep. And we had a separate guidelines for that. The reason why the guideline is not included in the attendance policy is because we don't know if there will be a remote option. But the good news is that the traditional attendance policy still applies.
Okay. But like this year, if someone was, someone logged in for 30 seconds, like for attendance, and then logged out, were they counted as all day or?
30 seconds. That's when, at the beginning, we had some of that. That's when a parent conversation would occur.
Okay. Super. All right.
Yeah, because we were still in the process of doing this dance. So yes, conversation needed to occur.
Such a dance. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. This brings us to item 11, consent agenda items for routine matters, treasurer's report, budget transfers, acceptance of food service price recommendations for the 21-22 year, award bids, approval of the CSE, CPSE recommendations. I'll take a motion to accept. Mrs. LaPlaca. A second. Mr. Rivers. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Brings us to personnel actions. And I have been informed that Mrs. LaPlaca needs to state for item 9 of the personnel actions.
Please let the record show I'm related to Stephen LaPlaca, mentioned in number 9 in personnel actions. I do not need to abstain.
All right. I'll take a motion to approve. Mrs. Laird, second. Mr. O'Brien, you want to? Okay. All right. Any other discussion? I'm sorry. Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me, Mrs. McBride. I'm sorry, I had some questions and comments about the consent agenda items. I was raising my hand but wasn't acknowledged.
I'm so sorry, I didn't see you.
Yes.
Let me finish this item first, please, because we're in the middle of a vote.
Sure.
So, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. What are your questions?
Okay. So what you put in a consent agenda item is actually a really huge item. This is the first that I've learned that you expect a general fund surplus of about $13 million. And, you know, last year it was $14 million. So, you know, you raised the tax levy this budget year by $3 million. Obviously, we learn now you didn't need to do that. Even if you hadn't done that, there would have been a hefty $10 million surplus. So my question is, why not consider spending some of that $10 million on student education, on some of the remedial items that are necessary, on special education services? I know families who said that they needed special education services this year and didn't get them. I know families who say that they can't get assessments for their kids because the district won't pay for them. There are many more kids, I'm sure, who could use in-person summer learning. So I would wish that of that $10 million, you would have some public discussion about it before putting it into various reserve funds. The last audited financials showed $61 million across different restricted funds. Some of that's been spent, but you've added money to those as well. That's a lot that you're tying up in these restricted funds. So I'd love to see discussion on, applying it to student needs, or else giving some of that money back to our taxpayers. We have struggling business owners. We have struggling homeowners that are still trying to get their footing coming out of the pandemic. And the next agenda item, you're considering raising school lunch prices for families. I think a little more relief for the families is in order. And I wish I would hear some discussion about this insurance reserve that you've just established in a consent item, when, really a better term would be liability reserve, because it's not money that goes towards insurance. It'd be money that would go to pay liability costs that are over and above insurance. I am not aware of the need for that fund. I would love to know, to what extent is the district paying liability costs over and above what insurance has paid? How big are those numbers? Do you need $1 million or more for unfunded liabilities? So I guess, I'm just asking, could there be some discussion for the sake of the public and the good of the order about the use of $13 million of surplus? That's 10% of the budget, and that's a really large amount.
So the first thing I want to say is I just want to remind everyone that we purposely contributed more money to the levy this year. The only money that went into the levy was contributed through new business and new growth. So the tax rate itself stayed flat. This board appropriated almost $2 million so that taxpayers could get that relief that you're talking about.
I'm sorry, for 2021, Mr. Wright?
Yeah. For
2021, the current year. That hasn't.
And the other thing I would say is that this is a perfect segue into our next section, where we're going to be talking about just this, the rationale for what we're recommending as far as fund balance and future reserve planning. As I said before, we're very well positioned going into this school year. When we talk about expanding summer opportunities, we have more resources than we've had in a really long time in support of summer learning. The issue is really what Nirlan talked about earlier, is that you simply don't have drivers, you don't have paras, and you don't have teachers right now able to work those programs. So the issue in terms of summer learning was never about resources.
Well, would we get more drivers and teachers and paras if we could pay them more?
Well, here's what I would say to that. It's not even, if you want to talk about bus drivers, that never goes to, well, I shouldn't say never, but in this case doesn't go to a driver shortage. It just goes with people willing to work. And the same with teachers as well. I don't think it's about money this year. I think it's that people feel that they need a break. At least that's the feedback that we're receiving.
And it's important to remember that we work in a collective bargaining environment, and our wages and salaries are fixed by contract. The board cannot unilaterally just establish higher pay rates in order to attract more folks.
But you could negotiate them.
They would have to be negotiated when the contract is up, correct?
So like I said, as opposed to, there's a lot on the agenda tonight, I think this would be a perfect segue into that conversation, and also talking about the rationale for establishing a liability reserve. We're in a very litigious environment, and I think it's prudent for our district to plan accordingly, which is why we're recommending the establishment of that kind of a reserve, because we deal with those issues more than the public realizes. So I'll turn it back over to Ms. McBride.
I'm sorry, just last question. Was there any board discussion about giving some money back to taxpayers?
We always have that conversation. and
Where
you-
was that
you-
conversation? Where did it happen?
It didn't happen right here at this moment, but we're going to be talking about our fund balances and how we want to utilize our funds here at the end of the year. So if you would allow us to go on to that next portion, maybe some of your questions would be answered.
Thank you.
All right. This brings us to the fund balance and reserve funding plan. And shall I just turn it over to Mr. Whitmore?
Sure. Yeah. Some of this information needs to be understood. When you look at the fund balance, basically, $8.5 million of it is one-time money that's not recurring, and it is used. Some of it is used to reduce the tax rate. That's what we call the assigned or appropriated fund balance. So this year we're recommending $2.6 million of the leftover funds be assigned or used to next year's budget, which means we don't need to tax that amount. So that is a direct benefit to the taxpayers. The important thing to remember, this is one-time money. We typically carry between 2.6 and 3 million. It's not new money generated every year. It's money, it's the same amount of money we've been able to carry over from year to year. But if there ever comes a time where costs spiral out of control or the state reduces our aid the way they threatened last year, this money would be spent, so it wouldn't be available in the following year. But it is used this year, and it's a direct benefit to the taxpayers because then we don't have to tax that amount. And by law, we're allowed to carry 4% unassigned fund balance, which is much, much lower than other governmental agencies in New York are allowed to carry and do carry. And that really is cash flow to carry us through the summer when we don't receive any state aid. Our property taxes don't start coming in until the latter part of September, but we have expenses through the summer and into September. So this board has always carried 4% unassigned fund balance, but it's that same money being carried over year after year. It increments a little bit because 4% of next year's budget is a little bit higher than this year's. But it's not new money that's being generated. So what we're asking is that 2.6 million be of assigned fund balance be used in next year's budget, which was in the budget that was developed by the board and approved by the voters. So that's already been set aside, and that enabled us to keep the tax rate flat. And then the 4% unassigned fund balance is used for cash flow purposes. So we're asking that the board allow us to continue that tradition. So really, it leaves us with $4.8 million of extra fund balance. So the board could use that to reduce the levy next year, but the thing under the tax cap, if the levy is reduced, that sets a new lower bar, and if we don't have that amount of money the following year, we're going to have a huge deficit. So we do not recommend that. We recommend the amount that was thoughtfully planned for in the budget process be used. But where it can go is in the reserves, and those reserves can be tapped in future years as needed to balance the budget. And that's what the recommendation is this year. So we're recommending the establishment of a new reserve. It's called the insurance reserve, but that's a bit of a misnomer because it's intended for unexpected costs that are not covered by our insurance policy, such as special ed 2 process settlements that could be retroactive, such as Child Victim Act that so many school districts around the county and state have seen claims for that go back 20 years. A lot of times we don't even know what insurance company or what insurance was in force. So it's for the unexpected. It's not looking at the last 3 years, what did we need? It's having it set aside for the unexpected, that the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, the once-in-a-lifetime lawsuit that we hope never happens, but very well could happen. So that's why we're recommending $1.5 million be put aside in the insurance reserve. And then the other are reserves that the board typically taps into in a thoughtful process during the budget process. So $1 million would be to replenish the retirement reserve, because this year's budget had used $1 million from the retirement reserve, so it just replenishes that money. $800,000 would go to the TRS subfund retirement reserve, which is a fairly new reserve. We've only had it for 2 years, and we're only allowed to put about $800,000 a year, so that would continue to build up. And then when our stimulus funds run away, that would get to Mrs. LaPlaca's point, what do we do then? We have these reserves built up that will carry us through another 2 or 3 years. And then finally, $1.5 million would go into, we're recommending go into our capital reserve, because even though the board takes our building aid from past projects and puts it into a capital, that building aid typically only covers 50 to 60% of the cost of a project, and newer projects always cost more than older ones. So this builds it up so we can fund newer projects. So our recommendation is to go there. And the state requires the board in the current fiscal year to make this determination, even though in reality we don't know. Our books won't be closed for another month. It won't be till the end of July, beginning of August, that we know what our final numbers are when we finally close our books. And so that's why the authorization, whatever, right now this is an estimate, the $4.8 million. And so whatever the estimate is too high or too low would be offset through the capital reserve fund. So if we end up with more fund balance, we would increase the $1.5 million to the capital reserve. If we end up with less, we would decrease it. So those are the recommendations. Any questions or comments?
I have a question about the insurance reserve. With that being a new reserve account, is that a reserve account that we could use going forward if we get shy on money and we're using so much of our retirement reserve, that kind of thing, or is it only for insurance purposes?
It's only to cover things that are not covered by insurance. So presumably it could be used for deductibles if we need it, or, I mean, we often have some of our special ed due process claims, they're fairly frequent. So there's a number of things that it could be used for, but really the hope is not to tap into it except in a dire emergency, because we do have unassigned fund balance we would use first.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, other questions? Okay. All right, then that would allow us to move forward the actions pertaining to the establishment of insurance reserve. All right, I'll take a motion, Ms. Abdullah. Second by Mrs. Laird. Any other discussion at the table? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next would be the action pertaining to the acceptance of the fund balance in the reserve funding year-end plan for 2021. Take a motion, Mrs. LaPlaca. A second, Mrs. Laird. Any other discussion? All right, take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This will bring us to our workshop on equity and inclusivity. As we begin this workshop, I want to remind everyone of our process. The presenters will share the workshop information. The board will then have their opportunity to have dialogue and ask questions. Once the board is finished, we will entertain questions and comments from the floor. Any comments or questions should be directed to the board rather than to the staff. I'll have you raise your hands, and I will ask you to come up to the microphone so that everybody has equal opportunity. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to...
Sure. It's with great pleasure that I introduce the members of our steering committee who are going to be presenting the recommendations of the committee this evening. This, on one hand, is the culmination of several years' worth of work around equity. And, on the other hand, it's the start of a journey, right?
Yep.
Because after they make their recommendations, it's our job to do something with them as an organization. So I think that's, if it's not our largest committee, it's one of the largest. We have nearly 50 people that participated regularly on that committee. We were remote all year, but had really lively, active participation throughout the course of the year. So just want to thank all of our committee members, want to thank all of the members of the committee who are here this evening, certainly not the entire committee, but the folks who are going to be presenting, our partners from U of R. We couldn't have done it without their support, having research and data behind us. I also want to just recognize our district leaders who have really carried this work forward. Dr. McHugh and Ms. Anselm, who were some of the initiators of this work. And I want to recognize Diane Wynn, our Director of Wellness and Equity. She has taken the ball the last couple of years and really propelled the work forward. And I certainly want to thank the board, because we consider ourselves to be very lucky. It takes a lot of courage to do this work, especially in this environment. And we feel that we can do it because, one, we have resources behind us, but two, we have always had your support and your backing. And I want you to understand how much that means to all of us. We're truly appreciative. And the last thing I want to say before I turn it over to them is that I hope that you're really proud of this work. I think it's something that we should take great pride in as a community. I say this at the risk of sounding arrogant, but I think we do this work just as good, if not better, than any district in this region. And in a district where nearly half of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch, year in and year out, we maintain a graduation rate of nearly 95%. That doesn't happen on accident. It happens because we're hyper-focused on giving kids what they need and supporting our families. And so we should be really proud of that. This year on the survey, 92% of the parents that took the survey said that they view the diversity that exists in our community and the work that we're doing around it as a real strength. Again, something that we should be really proud of. And the work that we're doing here is starting to get noticed statewide. Diane was asked to participate in a podcast that NYSBA put on earlier this year, the New York State School Boards Association. We were featured in Onboard, and when I say featured, I mean like the full page because of our equity journey. And we were also just recently asked to present at the New York State Council of School Superintendents Conference in Saratoga for the Commission on Diversity and Inclusivity. So I take great pride in the work. I know that you folks do, but as a community, I hope you recognize that there's such dedication behind this, and we're doing pretty good work. And the proof is in the pudding, as my father says. And when you look at the end result, it's because we're doing this work that we're getting kids across the stage. And I say that recognizing that we still have lots of work to do. So I'm going to turn it over to the committee, and it looks like Nirlan's ready to go.
I'm always ready to go, Dr. Wright.
She says that teasingly. She just does it to mess with me.
As you were talking, the thing that came into my mind is how proud we are of our Rush-Henrietta Central School District. And as you indicated, there's a lot of work that we do behind the scenes. We know there are refinements. We know that there are things that we need to do. But the reality is, when we are doing great work, we also need to take the time to celebrate and give us a little bit of energy. I always say, you know, when you go give blood, they give you cracker and water to replenish, and occasionally we need to be able to give ourselves cracker and water to keep on going. So we stand here before you. There's 11 of us here, and of course, the 2 board members who are on the stage who have been through this process with us and a part of the committee for the last 4 years. Even though we are presenting with you, but as Mr. Wright said, we have about 50 members of this committee, and we know there are folks watching on live stream and parents who doesn't know how this thing started. So if you would indulge me, I'd like to take a minute to really help the community to understand this work did not start yesterday or last year. This work really started with the leaders, which is the Board of Education. Because it wasn't with us that this work started. This work started with you. I don't know if you recall that one day you went to a convention far away and you came back very excited and wanted to know, what is this culturally responsive education thing that they talked about? We are eager to learn more, and we want to understand it a little bit. And then the other piece that you introduced to that was the restorative practices. And at that time, you came back so excited, you gave me a lot of work to do. And I took the charge, and I said, yeah, I want to find out about restorative practices, etc. But the first year began in 2015 and 2016 when you said to us, and you gave us a charge, that you wanted to improve your understanding of culturally responsive education. And there were 2 essential questions that you said you wanted the workshops to center around, because you wanted to examine what are the characteristics of a culturally responsive Board of Education. And the other thing you wanted to explore was, how can the board critically examine programs and make decisions to positively impact all? We took that seriously. We partnered with the M.K. Gandhi Institute and also the Gay Alliance. We put together some workshops for you that was well received. But prior to the workshops that were done in public, what a lot of people don't understand is that you also had articles that you read, and there were also TED Talks that you watched. One of them was The Danger of a Single Story. For those who wants to go online and find it, it's really powerful. So that work continued. You did your work. And in 2016, 2017, you said there's more for the board to learn. So again, you charge us with making sure that we provided more workshops for you centered around the same thing. But this time, you went a little deeper. The essential question that you wanted us to provide workshop around was, to what extent does understanding our own implicit biases support a more inclusive environment that fosters culturally responsive decision-making? I don't know of any other board that's asking those questions. And so you charge us again with giving you workshops. And again, before the workshops, I don't know if you recall, but one of the things that you participated in was completing the Harvard implicit bias test. Why did I take that time to kind of give a little overview? And that's just a snippet, because it is important for the public and our parents, our families, our community to understand. When we took that charge and finally welcomed in 2017 and 18, when you established the welcoming diversity as a district priority, all of that work began with you. And you said, it is time that we as a district, we as a community, really embrace our diversity. Sometimes people think of our diversity as just race, but also we have to understand we have groups of students who are students with disabilities, groups of students who identify as LGBTQIA+, et cetera. And what you wanted to make sure is that we give the opportunity for everyone to be at the table. So those are a little overview. And if people want to find out more information, what they need to understand is that when we have a district priority, we have some improvement plan, we have a mid-year update, and an end-of-the-year goal update. But because of time, I will keep it short. But here's the other piece. Once as you establish the welcoming diversity as a district priority, we said, myself and Pat, we worked together and said, ooh, we have to coordinate and facilitate this thing. What is it that we want to do? And so the first year, what we said is that we wanted to form a committee of multiple stakeholders, and that includes parents, that include leaders from the district, that also includes our students. And here are some of the things that we said to the individuals that we were talking to of what is the purpose of this committee. So here are the things. To hire a consultant to work with the committee, to identify key issues and questions, check, University of Rochester was hired. And prior to them, understand that we interviewed 3 different groups of people before we made that determination. The next was to develop and administer a needs assessment, to evaluate the district's progress in current practices regarding respect and appreciation, etc. Check. We have done that. And because of COVID, we were supposed to be presenting this to you last year, the needs assessment. We took another year. We said we needed to continue to work with the U of R, and that's what we have tonight, and that's what the bulk of our presentation will be about. The next one was to provide guidance and consultation to the Board of Education and district leadership with regards to the district priority, especially as the needs assessment results are shared, and as an end goal to develop a 3- to 5-year plan to address the issues and findings identified through the needs assessment. Mr. Wright said it best. This is the beginning. We are here to produce the recommendations to you, but the work doesn't stop. But in the meantime, we said it's going to take time to complete the needs assessment. What can we do in the meantime? Aside from running the committee, from learning together, from having just courageous conversation, then we introduce restorative practices and workforce development priority. And Dr. McHugh is going to talk about the workforce development piece because that's a piece that he leads. But I want you to know to date, when we took the charge of the restorative practices, and for those who doesn't know, what restorative practices allow is for a shift in practice that results in a culture which is inclusive, builds fair process into decision-making practices, and facilitates students' learning to address the impact of their actions through an approach that allows for true accountability, skill building, cooperation, and mutual understanding. And when we saw the benefits of what restorative practices can do in a school setting, we said it aligns with our equity and inclusion priority. And you'll see that over time we went from welcoming diversity to what you will see, and Diane will talk about that. But to date, 280 staff members and 64 administrators have been trained in restorative practices, and 20 students as well. And then 75 individuals have been trained in restorative discipline because we believe that we are an institution that needs to teach students pro-social behavior and understand that, yes, they will make mistakes, but they need to be able to learn from it and then repair harm when the opportunity is provided. So then workforce diversity is another piece that we added to that as well.
Thank you, Nurlan. I think it's important, 2 things are very important to note about what Nurlan just said. One was that the commitment to this type of work takes courage, takes commitment, and takes perseverance, and it must come from the Board of Education and the highest levels of the district, because those conversations are going to get tough. And we're seeing it now around the county and around the country, that the conversations are starting to get tough. And if the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools and the district leadership and the district staff are not on board, you're going to have a much rougher go with this, because there are people out there that want to challenge this work. But we know it's the right thing for children, and we're going to continue to do it. And when we started the needs assessment with our steering committee about 4 years ago, we knew that the needs assessment would take a long time. We were committed to a 2 to 3 year process because that's the time it would take to do the research, gather the data, analyze the data, identify needs, go back, gather and then analyze more data and continue that cycle. But we knew the work couldn't wait for the end of the needs assessment and for this report that you're going to hear tonight. So even while that work was taking place on the steering committee, and we were gathering as a group, as a community group, religious leaders, parents, students, teachers, outside agencies, etc. Even as that work was going on and we were doing our learning and our studying of the issues and of the data, there was implementation within the district of such initiatives as restorative practices. One of the other initiatives that this Board of Education took as the first in this region to do so, one of many firsts you'll see in the report tonight that Rush-Henrietta has taken the lead on, was to approve and adopt a 5-year workforce diversity plan. And the reason we adopted that plan, the reason the board approved that plan, was because we recognize if we are going to talk the talk around diversity and around equity and inclusion, then we better walk the walk as well. And we better ensure and do whatever steps we need to take for as long a time as it takes to ensure that our staff, our teaching staff, our support staff, our administrative and leadership staff start to look more like the community and the students and families that we serve. And so that was what our Workforce Diversity Initiative was grounded in. And again, starting with the board, a commitment to make sure that we're doing everything we can to hire more teachers of color, more support staff of color, et cetera, so that our students, all of our students, can see themselves reflected in our staff, and all of our students can benefit from the richness of a diverse experience that we know has positive effects for all students. And I'm going to turn it back to Nora.
Sure. And as mental wellness was becoming also great overall, you also said, well, you know, we want to hire a director of wellness, but in order for this work to continue, we also want to make sure that that person can also do equity. And so it is my pleasure to present Diane Nguyen, your Director of Wellness and Equity.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to be here tonight with members of the steering committee, and I want to point out that Diane and May are also members of our steering committee, so we're going to be asking them to share out a little bit as well, because they have been committed and working alongside us throughout this whole process. Oops. Let me go back one here. So before I turn it over to Sheila and Nahoko, we always like to ground ourselves into our district priority. So we do have the district priority posted up here. It's important to note that first sentence, the Rush-Henrietta Central School District stands united against racism and discrimination, was added this year. And I think as Nerland and Pat just shared, that shows a real commitment to this work. And you will see throughout tonight's presentation the ways that the steering committee has united with the community, with teachers, with parents, to really come up with recommendations that are very powerful for the work that we're going to continue to do moving forward. So I just wanted to point out really quickly, before I do turn it over to Sheila and Nahoko, these definitions of equity, inclusion, and diversity. It's really, really important that we understand and that we share a common language on what this means. When we talk about we're providing, we're mitigating inequities, and we're making sure that we are ensuring equity and making our environments more inclusive, we really thought it was important that we had a shared language. So one of the very first things that the steering committee did was to come up with these shared definitions of equity, inclusion, and diversity. You'll see a lot of these words that were chosen in these definitions, like access to opportunities, empowerment, valuing differences. You're going to see these in a lot of the recommendations tonight, because these definitions really show what our school community and our district community feels that equity, inclusion, and diversity really looks like. So as we present the recommendations tonight, please keep in mind these definitions reflected in there. So now I would like to turn it over to Sheila and Nahoko, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about the process of the needs assessment that was conducted.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. My name is Nahoko Kawaki O'Connor, and I'm faculty at the University of Rochester's Warner School of Education and the Director of Program Evaluation at the Center for Professional Development and Education Reform.
Good evening. I'm Sheila Robinson, and I'm a consultant with the University of Rochester at the Warner Center for Professional Development and Educational Reform.
So our charge as consultants coming into this project was to support the Committee on Equity and Inclusion in the needs assessment process as recommended. As you know, needs assessments are important because it helps a district be able to determine its current areas of strengths as well as areas of opportunities for improvement. In this particular needs assessment, the purpose was to conduct a needs assessment related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also have data that was going to be able to informative for the development of the recommendations of the action plan moving forward. Another purpose of the needs assessment, though, for this needs assessment was to build capacity within the steering committee. So unlike traditional needs assessments where you contract with a consultant and you have the consultant come in and conduct the needs assessment and provide the leaders with a report of a needs assessment, Pat and Narland had the foresight to know that a participatory project was more meaningful and authentic and would engage committee members, create a community of learners, and involve a diverse set of voices to build a stronger recommendation. And in that spirit, our goal was to prepare for the monthly steering committee meetings, facilitate dialogue and discussion, and be able to talk across differences, and capture the conversation and decision-making at each stage of the needs assessment process. We started the needs assessment process with determining the questions. This was a fairly involved process where each committee member presented 2 questions, and as a group, we went through all of them and then ended up with 24 questions that were then put into these broad categories of diversity, cultural proficiency, equity, inclusion, and bias. We wanted to make sure that there were questions that were related to each of these categories, and some of them had overlaps. You might be, the numbers presented, I'm not sure if you're able to see this but on the screen, but the numbers presented after each category represent the number of questions that were related to those categories. And if you're wondering why are there so many in some categories than others, it's because some of the questions are much broader and the other questions might have been much more specific. You'll all be receiving one of the data books that you've received in previous years that show all of the data and the findings from our process.
So we collected data from a number of sources, starting with the data that existed in the district itself. So we looked at data from student attendance, achievement, discipline. We talked with folks about what professional development was going on in this area, and we looked at information from the district website. We then conducted a number of focus group interviews. So these are discussions, conversations with small groups of people that we conducted over time. So we talked with teachers from a number of different buildings, and then this past spring, we had the opportunity to conduct focus groups with students from all of the secondary schools as well. Along the way, we did surveys that garnered hundreds of responses. We surveyed parents and community members, teachers, instructional and non-instructional staff, and of course the student satisfaction survey that is typically administered in Rush-Henrietta each year provided us additional data and student voice. Throughout our work with the committee, we also gathered the notes that we were taking along the way. As we presented data to the steering committee and we entered into discussion with them and worked our way toward creating this set of recommendations that we're very proud to share with you this evening, we use those work notes, field notes, if you will, as data for the needs assessment as well. Throughout the way, as we shared data with the steering committee, we didn't just show up and present a bunch of charts and graphs and say, here it is. We took the committee through a data-driven dialogue process that helps us slow down and think a little bit deeper about the data that's in front of us. And this data-driven dialogue protocol has us reflect on questions such as, what assumptions are we entering with? And what are the predictions we're making? What are some questions that we're asking of the data? What are the possibilities for learning from this data set? What are the patterns and trends that are emerging? What surprises us? And What are things that we have not explored? Sorry? Along the way, we also needed to build capacity with the steering committee as well. So we had a very collaborative process throughout. We did procedures like voting and setting priorities, using dots and chart paper back in the day when we were in person. We did a lot of very physically active, moving around the room, discussing with each other and sharing ideas in that way. We also shared with the committee ways to analyze data, such as the qualitative data that came from our focus group transcripts. So focus group transcript results in all text, the conversation that took place. So we taught steering committee members how to code and categorize the words and phrases to make sense of them, so that we could recognize the themes that were coming up again and again as we held these conversations with students and teachers. A very collaborative meaning-making exercise. And all along the way, we practiced dialogue, deliberation, and inclusion, and the idea of beginning with the end in mind. So that brings us to talking about a culturally responsive framework that Diane is going to share with you, and then, of course, that wonderful set of recommendations. Thank you.
So as Sheila and Nahoko just shared, we did use that data from the needs assessment to really drive the recommendations we're going to be presenting tonight. But the other important thing to remember is that the second thing that we used to drive our recommendations was the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. And we have talked about this a little bit at a previous board meeting, but just to share with the community who may not be familiar with it, this framework was developed in 2018. It was quite a large process that involved many, many stakeholders across New York State who came together and really said, we want to develop something that is going to guide school districts in looking at all areas in order to be culturally responsive. So what the framework does is it presents an opportunity for stakeholders to continue to work together and plan for the unique needs of their communities. The great thing about the New York State Culturally Responsive Framework is it focuses on being culturally responsive, and it focuses on being sustaining. And I think that word is so important for us to remember. We hear a lot about culturally responsive education, but this is really an important word that whatever we do, we want it to sustain throughout our district. So we were really clear in when we talked about recommendations to really be thoughtful about what recommendations are going to be sustaining and are going to be long-term and have the greatest impact. So this is just kind of a reminder of the systemic, the systemic approach to addressing equity and inclusion in the district. The recommendations that we are going to present tonight will reflect the systemic approach. You're going to see in those recommendations that it does include departments, school buildings, community members, parents, students, families, building leaders, district leaders. It really is very, very comprehensive. And the last thing I wanted to share before I turn it over to our wonderful committee members is one of the most exciting slides for tonight that shows, again, as Superintendent Wright shared, that Rush-Henrietta was ahead of the curve on this. So what you'll see on the right are the 4 main principles of the New York State framework. So there are welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment practices, and ongoing professional learning. So those are the 4 main principles that are in that framework. The areas on the left are the subcommittees that Rush-Henrietta came up with before this framework was ever in existence. And as you can see from the arrows, they align very closely with what New York State said we should be focusing on. So our subcommittees were focusing on instruction, curriculum, professional development, outreach, social emotional learning, all of the areas that are identified in the framework. So again, I just want to say it's so great to be part of a committee who was so forward-thinking before we even knew that this framework was available. So just a reminder before I turn it over to our committee members, these are the 4 main principles. So we will be presenting 12 recommendations tonight. We have 3 recommendations that are in each of these 4 areas. And again, these were developed based on the results of our need assessment and based on alignment with what New York State is saying is best practices for school districts. So now I'm going to turn it over to 4 members of our steering committee who are going to introduce themselves and walk you through the recommendations.
Good evening. My name is Geraldo Torres. I'm the food service director here at Rush-Henrietta. I've had the honor of being part of the Equity and Inclusion Steering Committee since the beginning in 2018. So much work has gone into the development of these recommendations we're presenting tonight. And being part of this team and the work we did has been very rewarding in both my professional and personal life. So I'm here to present to you the recommendations from my subcommittee who worked on Focus Area 1, which is creating a welcoming and affirming environment. So the first need under the focus area of creating a welcoming and affirming environment is the inclusion of student voices from our diverse community. We have to make sure that there is student input in decision-making and recognize the cultural background, insight, and strength of our diverse student population. So our recommendation for this particular need is to empower and amplify student voices in decision-making and planning through multiple opportunities in order to build an inclusive, respectful school environment that acknowledges and appreciates the diversity of our community. So some examples of what this may look like or how we could carry it out can be educating staff on the elements of culturally responsive teaching by using student voices to share messages with staff, or providing students forums, safe spaces, if you will, and community building circles to amplify student voice. Next slide. The second need in the focus area of creating a welcoming and affirming environment has to do with the physical spaces in our district. There is a need to have welcoming environments reflected in our school and district buildings by ensuring that school and district buildings are welcoming and affirming physical environments to diverse student, families, and staff who make up our community. So our recommendations for addressing this need is to assess the physical environment of all district buildings and classrooms to determine whether the diverse culture, languages, and backgrounds are reflected and valued. To answer the question of what this might look like, some examples are conduct walkthroughs to determine areas of the building where celebrating our diverse community can be made more evident. Ensuring that classrooms have signage, language, and visual reflections reflecting our diverse families and culture. Next slide. And finally, under the creating a welcoming and affirming environment is the need for increased diverse family engagement and collaboration to ensure that families feel connected to our school communities and their voices are welcome and affirmed as district partners. Our recommendation for addressing this need is to develop a variety of opportunities for families to connect with our district in order to ensure that our schools are welcoming and affirming places. A couple of examples of ways to make this recommendation actionable could be creating parent forums to build relationships and obtain input. Provide community building circles for parents to connect with others. And so these are just some of the ideas I mentioned here but the rest of them are listed on your slides. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keanu Campbell, and I am currently a kindergarten teacher at Winslow Elementary School. I am also lucky to be a member of the Rush-Henrietta community with 3 children that attend the district. I have had the privilege of being a part of the Equity and Inclusion Steering Committee since its beginning in 2018. The work that was done was a labor of love, and I am so proud of it. Today I'll be discussing Focus Area 2, Fostering High Expectations and Rigorous Instruction for All. The first need that we have found when addressing this is ensuring equitable academic enrichment and access to opportunities. Our recommendations for addressing this need is to increase communication to students and families regarding academic enrichment resources and address potential biases and recommendations for advanced, honors, and AP courses. A couple of examples to make this actionable could be developing culturally responsive and engaging family communication specific to academic enrichment opportunities for all students. Another could be encouraging students' academic interests early on through expanded career exploration opportunities at the elementary level. The second need that we have found was ensuring academic rigor embedded throughout the school day. Our recommendation for addressing this is to use school-based teams and parent partnerships to explore ways to ensure instructional rigor at all grade levels in classes. An example or a couple to make this actionable would be considering a range of instructional strategies to increase rigor and embed effective, culturally responsive teaching practices. Also considering ways to encourage students to take academic risks and become independent and critical thinkers in a safe and supportive learning environment. Our final need that I will share is ensuring engagement of all students in the learning process. Our recommendation for addressing this need would be providing ongoing and creative student engagement strategies to ensure a range of strategies to engage diverse student populations. A couple of examples might be considering the barriers to student engagement and ways to remove those barriers. Brainstorming ways to increase engagement for students with a range of backgrounds, including those with social-emotional, medical, or mental health needs. One way could be to support students in identifying their learning style, their individual strengths, and needs. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kim DeLarge, and as of Thursday, I will be the parent of a 6th grader at Valmer Elementary School. So excited to have made it through 5th grade, I cannot tell you. I've been a member of the DEI committee for the past 4 years since the beginning, and today I'm representing the Curriculum and Assessment Subcommittee. Our first recommendation, much like the committee itself, is to bring together diverse teams of stakeholders to review curriculum for cultural relevance and gaps. Examples of what that might look like include developing a framework and guiding principles for discussing current events, and discussing ways to ensure representation of all our diverse students in text. Our second recommendation centers around social-emotional learning. Our recommendation is to evaluate alignment between learning and practices and develop competencies for students and staff. Some examples of what this might look like include considering ways to expand SEL throughout the school day and offer additional opportunities for staff to learn about SEL strategies. Our final recommendation is to develop multiple opportunities and modalities for students to be assessed and demonstrate learning. In other words, find equitable ways to measure what students have learned. What this might look like includes considering ways to align academic and social-emotional assessment practices and utilizing multiple modalities to allow students to show what they've learned as it relates to standards. Thank you.
I'm Dominic Piacentini. I'm the Director of Professional Learning and Program Evaluation, and Diane and I are going to both tag team this last focus area 4, which is to engage in ongoing professional learning and support. So the first need identified in this area is to develop a common professional learning opportunity for our district community. So not to say that this hasn't been happening and training has not been occurring, as we've alluded to over the past several years, but based on the committee and the recommendations moving forward, we're going to be having and recommending a solid, aligned experience for all staff and stakeholders across the board. So a recommendation would be to develop a timeline of professional learning topics to cover at each school building and department within each school year in the forthcoming school years. What this might look like would be to map out topics pertaining to the district priority around equity and inclusion to be shared and experienced by all stakeholders, to embed, as Diane alluded to, the culture response sustaining framework in all professional development opportunities and raise awareness implementation. The second area is opportunities for strong culturally responsive practices to be shared. We know that our teaching staff learns best from each other and that they are the experts in the field. And so the recommendation is to use data and input to identify teachers using effective culturally responsive teaching practices and racial literacy skills and determine ways in which these can be shared with colleagues. This could look like opportunities for peer coaching and collaboration, having teachers present at faculty meetings and PDs across the district and the buildings, and to continue to provide opportunities and platforms for teachers to share their effective practices.
And our final need that was identified by the steering committee under professional learning and support is to ensure family engagement and to strengthen partnerships with parents in learning together as a community. So our recommendation that the committee came up with is provide learning opportunities for district families and community members that are aligned with professional development being provided to district staff in the areas of equity and inclusion. So we really want to continue what we started with our equity journey and make sure that the entire community is learning together. What this might look like, a couple of suggestions are embedding topics from district meetings into family professional learning opportunities, or offering community building circles focused on equity and inclusion to parents. So as you will see from all of the recommendations that our committee members just shared, there are several themes among our goals and our recommendations. So one theme that was very strong throughout all 12 of these recommendations is really celebrating our Rush-Henrietta diversity. That includes our school environments, our curriculum, our equity. We really want to make sure that we're celebrating our diversity in everything throughout the district. There's a theme of collaborating with each other to help foster a more equitable community. As has been said many times tonight, this work does involve collaboration, and Rush-Henrietta is strong because of the collaboration that we have behind all of our equity work. So we want to continue to really strengthen that. A third theme is increasing partnerships with students and families about equity and inclusion. So again, making sure that we're strengthening those partnerships both within our school buildings and also with the Rush-Henrietta community. And then finally, learning and growing as individuals and together as a district and as a community. So now that we have shared our needs assessment and the themes across all of our recommendations, we would just like to respectfully ask Diane and May if you have anything additional that you would like to share about your experience on the steering committee.
Go ahead.
First, I want to thank you so much for coming, not just for presenting to us today. This is like there's 2 years or 3 years of rehearsals, and this is showtime today for us. And I want you to take a minute to celebrate and feel proud of what you have accomplished so far. But the work doesn't end, as Bo said. This is just the beginning of a different journey now. When I joined the committee 4 years ago, I was like, we're gonna have a presentation and recommendation, and boom, we're done. Silly me, I did not understand or fathom the magnitude of the work. So the journey actually started with self-reflection, there's a ton of growth that the committee members actually went through, and it took a lot from us to be actually courageous, to feel vulnerable and share our lived experiences and backgrounds, our concerns. And it was And I thank Roland and Pat for giving us the space and being very respectful of where we are at the journey. We didn't all come from basically the same understanding of what equity looks like. And the U of R team, of course, they were very supportive, and they gave us the space when we needed, and they interjected when we needed their feedback or input. This is not an easy thing. As a parent, when I joined the committee, I was just thinking, you know, when I send my kid to school, I want them to feel safe. This is what I wanted to bring to the committee. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel heard and seen. I want them to have the same opportunities and access to the same opportunities, removing all these barriers in front of them just to be successful. Their journey might look different from Jennifer's child, maybe. My child needs extra support because they might have a learning disability, or I needed an interpreter, maybe because English is my first language. So just equity, to me, is providing all of that. It doesn't have, we didn't have any other agenda. We just wanted to provide RH students with the same expectation of success, no matter how this journey looks like, no matter what they needed. We wanted to provide them with the services, whether it's social, emotional, mental, or academic services they need to make sure that they are successful and they reach their end goal. Their end goal might look different from another child, but we want to help them reach that end goal. So I commend you for being on this journey with us, all of us here, and I tell you, take a minute to celebrate, but the work continues because there's a lot that needs to be done. So thank you.
Boy, that's hard to follow.
Is that rambling?
No, it's good rambling. For me, this journey started back in that 2015 year. My encounter with a student concern really flagged for me the differences that are provided for our students. A student who as Bo talked about graduation rates, I knew if we didn't provide something different for this student, they were not going to graduate and they were going to be lost forever. It broke my heart. And we went to a conference and we came back, and poor Nerland, I learned about this and I learned about this, and what are we doing about, and it was like the snowball. And for us to be able to get to this place, to have a committee of so many different people who, when they first all entered into the room, and everybody kind of sat on their side, if you will. It was, nobody knew quite what to expect from one another, what was going to happen in this group, and was it safe? Was it safe to speak our truth? And starting with circles gave us that opportunity to be safe and to be able to share. And I think the most joyful piece for me is the learning from one another, from sharing out different experiences and different thought processes of how things might affect someone from a different background. And I'm not just talking race, I'm talking a special ed student, someone who comes into the district that speaks no English, how everything that we do affects them individually. And to see this group come together and learn and not wait for the needs assessment, but start the things we were learning, to start working together right away to make those little pieces become bigger pieces and to be part of a growing and learning opportunity. I'm excited about the recommendations. I'm really excited that we're getting ready to jump into the work deeper. This is important work for this community. We have such a diverse community, and we need to reach to each of them, and we have our children. I'd love to see our graduation rate be 100%. And that is really always been my goal, to bring every student along so they're successful.
Thank you. So before we close, we did post all the names of the steering committee members, and we just want to take a minute to thank everybody who's here from the steering committee and everyone who's watching this from home from the steering committee for all of their passion and commitment to this work. And we thought it was really important that their names are there as well, because they have done all of this work even if they are not physically here. So in closing, we just want to share a couple next steps. We are going to be really, as you all said, diving into the work next year. So we do have a 3-year draft plan that is under construction and pending the board's reviewing these recommendations. We will be kind of finalizing that draft plan and then moving forward. Something else is that we want to be clear that there will be ways to measure progress and ensure accountability with these goals. So these are recommendations right now, but again, we wanted to present them to all of you before we really delve into what exactly is this going to look like and how we are going to measure progress, because that's going to be really important. And then lastly, we will be sharing this presentation and the results of the needs assessment with the community, so those will be available on the district website. And we just wanted to end with a quote from one of our committee members. So we did do a survey with the steering committee to get everyone's input on their experience. And one person said, you know, I always end with a quote. I love quotes, but I loved this quote. Though I am one person, I have a voice that's been heard, and I know my thoughts and views will help shape the direction RH moves toward to be a truly inclusive district. I felt like that quote, whoever said that anonymously in our survey, really summed up how we feel. So we just want to thank everybody for your time and your attention tonight, and we're really excited to continue to the work as a community. And I'll turn it over to Superintendent Wright or Nerland or Pat if you have any last words.
Superintendent.
Okay. Well, I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of you. I want to thank the entire committee, but I especially want to thank the folks who were here and presented this evening. This has been an incredible journey. We look forward to continuing it. And in terms of the scope of work, you see that there's a lot there. And so I want to give the board an opportunity to comment and ask questions. Like I said, I know that it's a lot to take in. But thoughts?
For once, I don't have any questions. I don't know. I'm just listening to everything and just hearing all the work that's gone in on this. I mean, I always hear May. I think it was before COVID. You're like, oh, the last meeting we can like bring a friend. Would you come with me? And I was like really excited to go and see this, but unfortunately then COVID. But just to see all the work and just to see that this is about including everybody, including children with special needs, with emotional needs. And I just think that this is exciting. So I look forward to your plan and to look at it. And to say circles are really good.
We are not asking you to take action tonight. We do need to know that you're supportive of us moving these recommendations forward. And if you are, then in the fall, we would be putting the specific action plans in front of you for approval at that point. But what we are looking for tonight is for you either to say that you are supportive of us going forward, or you want us to take a different direction or consider some other things.
Question. Bo, is there any cost associated with this that you could share with us?
Yeah, sure. As you know, if we identify something as a district priority, then we put resources behind it. This year, geez, I'm hesitant to throw out a number, but I want to say that there was over $100,000 that was built into the budget. Most of that is centered around training for administrators, teachers, and staff on things like restorative practice, culturally responsive teaching, things of that nature, which would support the overall focus areas of our equity priority.
And also the contract with the University of Rochester to help us with the needs assessment. And one of the things, as Mr. Wright said, with the restorative practices, we wanted to start with an organization that knew how to teach us to do this well. So in addition to us going to training to learn about community building circles and all of the other restorative practices, early on we said, as a Rush-Henrietta community, we want to do it within our own organization. So that was the goal all along when we first developed the Restorative Practices Plan, to start with our partners in Restorative Initiative, which is called PERI for short. However, we wanted to grow our own. And I am excited to let you know that we will have our own trainer. We have trainers in-house, and then we also have a consultant who is a teacher who's retiring, who's coming back just for this work, to do it alongside us so that we can continue, because you know our population of teachers and staff members are huge, and we believe that everyone should have that experience of learning what community building circle is all about.
I would imagine that as you develop the plan, then we would have to build some things into the next year's budget in order to make those priorities in that plan move forward. So that would be something we would talk about down the road for sure, but great question.
Thank you.
I just want to say I'm proud to be an RH. This is amazing work, and as a parent of young kids, knowing that they're going to be in a district who embraces this, and they get to learn right along with myself and the district, it's amazing. So thank you for all of the hard work.
So it seems like folks support moving forward and getting an action plan, and great. All right.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as they are filtering out, having presented some really great information, we will move on to the superintendent's report.
You do have.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Sherman.
And I don't know if anyone else wanted the opportunity to speak about the equity plan, but I wanted to say that this is extremely important work, and I 100% support it. I look forward to be able to support it when I have my board seat. And I do have one question. I am here tonight with a new American with children in the district, and when I was campaigning for school board, I had the privilege of sitting with dozens of new American immigrant families and families for whom they are limited English proficient. I didn't see any recommendations for engaging these parents with limited English proficiency, and many of you might know that for our former refugee population, for example, we have the estimate is about 150 to 200 families who are Bhutanese American or came from refugee camps in Nepal. Many of them don't have the framework for a formal education, a public education, and so some of them, and I've heard this firsthand, don't understand the ways in which they can engage with the district, and for some of those families, I've also heard firsthand, their students are struggling with their academics. So I'm wondering if maybe someone from the committee can explain where in the priorities is engaging with those types of parents. Thank you.
Under creating a welcoming and affirming environment, there are other bullets that we did not get a chance to reflect, but one of the bullets talked about helping to ensure that classroom have signage, language, and visuals reflecting our diverse families and cultures, so that's one way. But again, also broadly publicizing opportunities for parents from diverse backgrounds to participate on district committees. So it's not only this committee's work, but there's also a parent engagement priority, which have been drafted from the DPAC committee. And one of the focus next year, we started some of that work in terms of making sure that we are inclusive of all of our parents, especially those who have English language as their either fourth language, their multilingual speakers. And so we want folks to understand that it's not only this committee, but there are also other parent engagement initiative and priorities that also speaks about that. But this one was just very broad, but there are other things that we are working on in the district to make sure that all parents, again, we're not just focused on one group, we're making sure that everyone has a voice, everyone has a seat at the table, everyone has their needs met, and so we're taking a holistic approach to this process.
And I would think as you dig in deeper to a plan, we'll get some more actionable items. And I do know part of the conversation at the table with this committee was those very things of how do we reach out to those families that have that language barrier? How do we make them aware of our school community, how education works in this country? Because we did recognize that it is different. It is different in other countries. I see a hand out here. Come on up to the microphone.
Hello, Suzanne Bennett, Peakview Drive. I'm a mom. I grew up in the 19th Ward, lived there for 39 years, married a country boy, city girl, country boy. When we had children, we decided that Rush-Henrietta was going to be the place to be. I was educated in the Catholic school system. Socioeconomic diversity always was important to me. He didn't quite get that, but it was fine, you know. Henrietta was halfway in between our parents. It worked out great. Since my kids have entered school, I've realized what a great job we've done. This is great. This is wonderful. But we always had that. I'm kind of like, what? Wait, what? I mean, we've always kind of done that. I'm a Leary mom. Before the whole reconfiguration, I was in there all the time, volunteering there, you know, teaching Sunday school, Girl Scout leader for 13 years. I had a troop for 13 years. I never did the Board of Education before. It was kind of never fit into the schedule. But I want to applaud you guys. And I've never done the Board of Education, and I kind of feel like there's a disconnect. I know you want the parents to come, everybody, all the parents. And until I came here because of the swim team, and again, it's been 4 months, we don't have a swim coach, but I really feel like there needs to be more of an outreach. And I know it's on the website, but we don't always get to look at it. I have filled out surveys. I never know where that data goes. I'm so glad you're talking to the children. You know, 8 of our swimmers spoke to you guys a couple months ago. Please keep talking to the kids, all of the kids. And I'm excited to see where things are going. But again, where are the parents? You know, you talked about this isn't a give and take portion. When is there a give and take? You know, when can we sit down and have conversations? I have the honor and privilege of knowing our student ambassador here. She's going great guns. She's going to go sky high. Her brother's at Harvard. She's probably going to be in Ivy League. You know, we have alumni here, Ivy League. We got to make sure that those kids who can achieve that can also achieve that as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then we will move on then to the superintendent's report. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you. There were 3 items that were submitted as written reports. Our annual report related to pilots and research projects, the professional learning plan, and then the policy review process proposal. And I do want to have a conversation around that. So before we talk about the policy review process proposal, which is item B, I wanted to ask if you had any comments or questions related to items A and C.
Anyone? Nope. Okay.
Okay. So you've had a chance to look at our proposal for the process next year. What we're asking the board to consider is a modification to the process where we would move from a 3-year review cycle to a 5-year review cycle. The thinking behind that being that it would eliminate redundancies which are inherent in our process, where you're asked to review a number of policies and then we make little or no changes because you just reviewed them. So a 5-year review cycle would allow us to review less policies, to go a bit deeper, and for it to be more relevant in the sense that we would be more apt to make changes at that point. We would also move to, within the process, we would review policy twice a year as opposed to 3 times a year, with the understanding that you could always add policies if there was something specifically that you wanted to look at, or in cases which we see rather frequently where NYSBA recommends that you review a policy because it tends to be a hot topic, then we could add those policies in. But what we're asking you to consider is some amendments that would streamline the process, but yet still maintain the fidelity of the process and the transparency of the process. So if you're in favor of it, then again, next year we would move to that model, and we would, I would call it a pilot year to see how it goes. If you're not in support of that, then we can either keep the process as is or consider other changes.
I really like the idea. It is overwhelming when we get all of these policies all at once. It's really hard to get through them and thoroughly look through them. And as much as I try, but sometimes, like tonight, we had a very full meeting. When we have those full meetings and looking at policies, it's really difficult to go through so many. I'd prefer to have them less times and be able to look more in depth.
I think also, too, as we review other practices within the district, as long as the key leadership is looking at things like the code of conduct we just reviewed it. Well, we know there's a bunch of policy that'll be coming to us for review. As long as, other items that we're reviewing, processes, that those people are looking at that portion, the policy, to make sure that they align, our practices align with the policy. I don't have a concern with dropping to 2 groupings a year. That is our responsibility. Laws and regulations are going to change. We get that information from NYSBA, but as long as those opportunities still arise for us to be able to take a look at it, things change. We need to be fluid with that change. That would be my concern, is being current. But I know you're looking at those policies from code of conduct, and there's other areas. Everybody else? Anybody else? Everybody good with that, going to a 2-year, the 2 per year?
I just think that we want to keep in mind that anyone can request something to be changed. So I think that should be highlighted, because if we do this, then we can add to it if we need to. So it's not like it's only this. So just highlighting that.
And that's where the policies that come to us from other folks will come in. You know, we get a first and a second read. That's usually where that comes in besides our review. So that, you know, policies are brought to us on a regular basis. So that is our responsibility.
I just completed my 4 hours of governance training at the New York State School Board Association. And, you know, as with all trainings, there was law, there was training on kind of best practices, I'd say, and then they also presented some of their judgment. And one of the items that came up in that area of judgment was that some school boards actually do not include as board-approved policies district regulations. They actually keep district regulations separate. And that would, based on my start of a review of the 4 inches of policy manual, which I was advised I may not have wished to print, but I did nevertheless because I wanted to have it all in front of me. I can see that a lot of the things in there are what you might call district regulations, how the district implements policy. So I guess for consideration, you may want to consider disaggregating district regulation from board policy, since setting policy, reaffirming policy is the most, not the most, a very important thing that the board does, and it would really reduce the thickness of those policies. It may not feel quite as daunting, and you would still be able to ensure, and you know, we, starting next month, would still be able to ensure that the board is affirming and reviewing its policies on a more frequent basis than 5 years, which does feel to me pretty long. Thank you.
Something we can have a conversation about at another time when you do come on, but I would say this, that most of the time a regulation is the how-to of a policy, and you need to review them at the same time. So that's been our general practice, but always open for conversation. All right.
Is there anyone that's opposed to piloting that process next year?
Nope. All right.
Okay, then we will give it a try. Under oral information, our focus is right now almost solely on trying to close out this school year, and really a heavy focus on our seniors, as it should be. We held out till the bitter end as far as postponing the Royal Comet Roundup on Monday. We have some meteorologists that we work with, and probably through midday they thought there was a good chance that we weren't going to get hit and that we would be able to move forward with it. And then the predictions changed pretty quickly, and we realized that it was probably going to hit within the first hour of the parade, and we didn't want to put anybody in harm's way, so we made the call last minute to postpone. So tomorrow is supposed to be the day. The weather is supposed to cooperate, but it's a little bit more difficult now, given the construction on Pinnacle. Our initial route sort of wraps around Pinnacle onto Calkins Road, and if you remember, last year we probably had over 300 cars roundabout, and that line backed up almost to
almost East End Railroad.
yeah, by the drugstore there. I think it's a CVS. So we're not exactly sure that we'll be able to keep the same route because they basically stopped work for us on Monday. They have to resume work, so a lot of what we can do is going to depend on how much they got done today and how much they get done tomorrow morning. There's a possibility that we can keep the same route. If we have to modify them, we would basically go in the other direction. We would start the parade probably from Roth and Lookout Park, and then route them up Good Burlette, and then down Lehigh Station Road the other way. So, and the difficult part for everyone is that we won't be able to notify people probably until like 12 o'clock when we have a chance to connect with the construction folks. And I will say this, we were watching them out the window today and they looked like they were making good progress in terms of the work that they were doing. So my hope is that we'll be able to keep the same parade route, but we'll let people know as soon as we can tomorrow morning. So that's the Royal Comet Roundup. The big events obviously center around our graduation ceremonies. They start Friday morning. We are going to do 5 ceremonies on Friday and 5 ceremonies on Saturday. Initially, we proposed rain dates, but we recently received permission from the Department of Health to utilize our gymnasium if we have to. And again, we wanted to be sympathetic to those people who had taken days off of work or were planning trips or graduation parties. And so we felt like, as opposed to, delaying, let's create a situation hopefully where we can keep to our schedule. And so the plan is, in the event that we have inclement weather, that we would notify families the day before and then plan to have all the ceremonies that next day in the gymnasium if we had to. People are asking about the reopening of schools. We are planning on a full reopening at this point, and in many respects, that planning is much more typical to our planning in a quote unquote normal school year, as far as deploying staff and looking at instructional program implementation and looking at building readiness and things like that. I would say, in terms of our preparation to this point, where it's a little bit different is, in terms of the type of supplies and equipment that we need to have on hand, or what our cleaning protocols will be. Adding resources in certain areas that we talked about to make sure that we're able to fund overtime for extra cleaning, to make sure that we're in a position where we can respond to technology needs and things of that nature. We still are moving furniture back into buildings and things like that. I would say there are still some unknowns. I'm very confident in our ability to reopen 5 days a week at this point, because I think even at the state level, where they've been slow to react, slow to issue guidance, I do think they understand the necessity of bringing kids back 5 days a week. And so I'm hopeful that the guidance will support that when it comes out. But we haven't seen guidance yet. So in terms of there's some guesswork involved in our preparation. For example, we talked about some of the resources that we added into the budget to support remote learning. Is that going to be a requirement next year? We still aren't sure. But we're in a position where we can respond to that, and I've already started to think through, based on what came back in the survey, what type of program would we be able to put together? How would we be able to leverage existing resources, especially based on what we've learned after doing this for almost a year and a half. So we've started to begin to think those things through. And that's another thing that I think that we did better than most districts in terms of the way that we structured our remote learning academy, because we staffed it. There were complications to that. Pat didn't always like it from an HR perspective because it was complicated as far as staffing went. But we almost set it up as like another school district. And it made for what I thought to be a much cleaner schedule and better instruction within the remote learning academy, because we had, for the most part, we had dedicated staff, and we set it up like it would be in a typical school situation. But again, you don't know what's going to be required, so there's a bit of guesswork there. We don't know what's going to be required as far as like distancing and things like that. So I think if there are question marks that could be complicated in terms of our planning, it's that distancing piece. So is the state going to come out with clear guidance anytime soon? That has yet to be determined. But I feel like we're positioned well in terms of our reopening based on what we know. And where I am confident at the state level is that they know that, reopening, putting schools in a position where they have to reopen within a hybrid model or fully remote, which I think I don't think we're going to be there unless there's a requirement and parents choose it. I don't even think we're going to be in a hybrid position. I feel good about the fact that we're going to be able to reopen. It's just a matter of seeing what the guidance looks like. But we'll shift gears here very quickly once we get past graduation and start working on that much more intensely. That concludes the superintendent's report.
All right. Brings us to new business. And the board goals were posted for us to all review. I think that we've made some really great progress through all of those. I think there's several, most of them could be reapplied next year. And some of them, the athletics facility, long-range planning, and explorations for a Good Shepherd school and site are in works. And that will be something that we'll continue to be working on through next year. Any major concerns with our goals from this year? It's been an interesting year trying to work on some of this through pivoting with the pandemic, but we move forward as best we can. All right. Any other thoughts or comments on those goals? Okay. Under new business, item B, the approval of due process settlement.
Sorry, Mrs. McBride, may I say a word about the board goals, please?
Yes.
Thank you. One, I want to say I'm very happy to see in their expanding outreach to better integrate cultural differences and values in communications and decision-making. Consider utilizing interpreters when appropriate, which I think is excellent. I want to applaud that goal. And then I just had a question about, there's a new goal in here under culture of collaboration that says reinforce chain of command. Can you explain what that means?
Working with the superintendent and the assistant superintendents, just reinforcing the fact that the day-to-day business starts here at the head of the table, and we work with the assistant superintendents to make sure that the priorities are being worked on, and that we are working together, and that we work through them collaboratively to make things work within the district.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And just keep these in mind as we get started with things over the summer and we get to September. We will be utilizing the district priorities to see if there's any changes to any of these goals, or we remove any or we add new ones. So keep that in mind, please. Thank you. All right, that brings us to board member reports, District Safety Committee.
The due process, Diane.
I'm sorry, thank you. I need a motion to accept the approval of the settlement. I have Mr. Rivers and Mrs. Laird. Any other discussion here? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. District Safety Committee.
All right, I'm going to skip everything that's already been mentioned tonight. So Ken Nelson reported the fire inspections were done and it went well. The water testing is complete in all the buildings. Shirley said transportation is going to continue to be provided for students who will attend in-person summer school. 21 drivers completed the advanced driver's course, and there'll be another course in the fall for those who wish to complete it as well. And Geraldo did say with the food program that we've mentioned before that volunteers are needed for food service program this summer to deliver food to the remote sites, such as Cub Care and the extended school year program at Vollmer. And lunches will continue to be free for the next school year for all students. And I think Diane, we talked a little bit about or Nerlon had mentioned earlier about having Crane and Sherman be involved with the U of R for elementary students. And Sharon Harris reported that the heat index is something they were concerned, they've been working on, although right now we haven't had a very warm few days luckily, but they said that she's regularly in contact with the different buildings to make sure that it's safe for kids to be outside. The heat index needs to be below 95 Fahrenheit for students to be able to go outside. And that there were they hosted two pop-up vaccine clinics within the last 2 months with many employees and their families taking advantage. And there was one concern brought up from Mike Dinsmore regarding the accident that had happened, or any accident, but the accident that recently happened, about having non-medical staff signing off on students as opposed to whether it's EMTs or the school nurse teachers, but that was just a concern he brought up. He said as a parent and as a firefighter. And I think that was the whole meeting. It was nice and short.
Thank you. Brings us to item B, Henrietta Youth Development Advisory Committee.
I wasn't able to attend the meeting. I wasn't feeling well.
All right, thank you. All right. Item 18 was the board officers' declaration of interest. A couple years ago, we moved away from a nominating process to see if this process would work any better for us, seeing sometimes a person calling about the nominations was someone that would be interested. It just was kind of strange and awkward. So this is an opportunity for folks to indicate if they're interested in being president or vice president. As I mentioned before, last time, typically first-year folks, we don't encourage them to run for that because there's a lot to learn and a lot of challenges. And I had indicated that I would be interested in running again for president to give us some stability as we move forward out of the pandemic into hopefully a more typical school year. I didn't know if there was anybody else that was interested here in president or vice president. Possibly over here.
Vice
Okay.
President.
Again, the reminder, the process will be that night at the reorganizational meeting. Karen will be facilitating the beginning of the meeting. There will be a nomination from the floor for president. Once the president is brought in, we'll move on to the president asking for nominations for the vice president. All right. That brings us to recap and preview.
Short and sweet. So first, thank you to everyone who presented tonight. It was all very well done. And please share with Dom that his fast rate of speech almost rivals mine. So all motions carried tonight. We did have some wonderful workshops with lots of information. And our next meeting will be on July 13th at 6 p.m. And for those of you who are new, it is business casual. Scott, I don't know if you're still here, but it's business casual. You don't have to wear a suit at our meeting in July and August.
All right.
That is it.
Actually, Anne Marie, they do have to wear something nice because pictures are taken on the first one in July. Sorry.
Oh, well, on that note, we will be having pictures taken that evening. Karen will give us information about when and where and how what I would suggest is you wear something that you can, just take the tie off for our meeting. All right.
Bummer.
Seeing it is the last meeting for our two friends on the other side of the table, would either one of you like to make a motion to adjourn, Nikki? And second?
Seconded.
Come on, James, you want it to go a little longer.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right. All right.
Just joking, James.
All right. All right, everybody, thanks for a great meeting. Have a good night.
Uh-oh.